they don't allow themselves to be photographed when they're dancing. It's like, for them, it's like going to church, and you don't take pictures. So I thought, well, how am I going to get a picture? And so I decided to call the Acoma Cultural Center, and I told them what I was doing and asked if there was any way I could get an image of what a dance costume looked like. And they said, well, does her family know that you're doing this? And I said, no. And he said, well, I think you should be in contact with them. And she has 2 daughters who became potters also. And so I became a correspondent with the daughters, and they sent me a picture so that I could make this quilt. And this is Lucy, the winner of many, many, many awards for her pottery. And this is Acoma. Out there in the middle of that dry land. And this is Lucy's house. That's Lucy's daughter in the middle, and Greg and Nellie. And this is Lucy's oven over here.
The kiln?
Huh?
The kiln?
No, it's a bread oven. Pearl, well actually, for the last quilt, I wanted to do Maya Angelou. But Maya was living at the time, and I didn't want to do her without her permission, because I just was worried somebody was going to sue me or something. I don't know why. I mean, I know that's really stupid, but it worried me. And I wrote to her to see if she would, let me do it, but I didn't hear from her. So in the meantime, I started reading about Pearl Buck, and I really fell in love with Pearl Buck. And while I was doing the research on Pearl Buck, I got a letter back from Maya saying that it would be fine with her if I made a quilt about her. So, but I was already in love with Pearl, so I decided there would have to be 13 quilts. Pearl was the daughter of missionaries to China, and so she grew up in China. She learned Chinese from her nanny, and she was told all these stories about the way things work in America, and they were stories of how wants America is, and how well we treat one another, and how everyone has plenty to eat, and no one wants for anything as a little girl. And she found the reality of America to be much different from what she thought it was going to be as a little girl. So her quilt is a dichotomy. The red section is her Chinese life and how that influenced her as an adult. And the green part is her American adventure. And she lived in Pennsylvania, so it's all kind of Pennsylvania Dutch hex signs. There's also a lot of writing on her quilt, both in Chinese and in English. And I had my local Chinese restaurant lady translate all my stuff into Chinese for me, so I could. She had a computer that wrote Chinese. Pearl had one daughter, and her daughter was born mentally retarded, and so it was something that Pearl thought about a lot, about the plight of children who and how they're treated when they aren't normal. And after she won the Nobel Prize, she funded, her daughter had to go into an institution. She funded that institution by building a little cottage on the grounds where her daughter could live with a few friends in a more home-like situation. So mental retardation was one of her causes. Asian and American relations was another one, because she really helped us as Americans understand the Orient, because we really didn't get those people. They were different from us, and we didn't understand their philosophy of life. She was also discriminated against when she lived in China, because she didn't look like everybody in China. So she understood what discrimination felt like, and she was very involved in racial equality in America by writing for the NAACP magazine Crisis. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature for the good earth. And of course, women's rights were very important to her, and Margaret Sanger was one of her best friends, and she helped out with the founding and the promotion of Planned Parenthood, because she felt like women should have the option to work if they chose and not be burdened with endless children. She established the Pearl S. Buck Foundation to bring children of American GIs born to Asian women to the United States. They were ostracized in many of their communities because they weren't pure. And she helped bring them, and so sometimes they were even abandoned. And she would bring those children to America and make sure that they had an education. And she even adopted 6 of them, I think. And peace was of the utmost importance to her, and she felt like if the world had enough food so that everybody had enough to eat, we would all have peace. This is her with a couple of her adopted children. And then there's Maya. She called herself a phenomenal woman in one of her poems. And this quilt was made after the Gee's Bend quilts were discovered. And so this is a uptight white woman's attempt at a Gee's Bend quilt. This has, in addition to the costumes, this has things that talk about Maya's life. Maya was born Marguerite. That's her real name. And she and her brother were sent from California by themselves on a train to Stamps, Arkansas, where her grandmother lived. And all she had on was a tag tied to her, that tag that's in the upper left-hand corner, tells the people on the train where to let her get off. There are book covers on the quilt, and a couple other things that were important to her life. She was a teenage mother, unwed teenage mother, and she had this one son who she was devoted to her whole life. She did a lot of getting by because she was in rural Arkansas and didn't have a lot of opportunities, but she was very resourceful and was a good cook, so she got a job at the Creole Cafe where she was known as Rita. Somehow she found a way to get herself to Africa, and she went to Ghana, where she worked in the American University there, teaching English, and she worked at a newspaper there also. She also was a dancer, so she joined the traveling company of Porgy and Bess after it left Broadway, and she was one of the principal dancers in Porgy and Bess. She also had a calypso act, and she also was a stripper. So under her calypso outfit, and you can do this if you want. Most people, I don't want to do this, but if you want to, when you go out there, she has her bra and G-string on underneath. Martin Luther King asked her to join the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and so that was her way of working in the civil rights movement. She starred as Kunta Kinte's grandmother in Roots, which was a groundbreaking miniseries. She was the author, and her most famous book is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. That's on the quilt. And Bill Clinton, being an Arkansasian, or however you say that, Arkansan, or I don't know how you say that, himself invited her to give the poem at his first inaugural, which was on the Wings of Morning. Right? And that's my girls.
Good job, Rebekka.
I'm gonna take it on the road.
questions?
Are you working on more now?
Nope. All of these quilts were done, everything is done by hand. They're hand applique, hand quilted. And after, there's 13 quilts and it took me 6 years to do it. And I was just tired. By the time I got done, I didn't care if I ever made another quilt. And I never have made another hand applique quilt since then. After I did these, I started learning how to do things on the machine. So I learned new skills after these quilts. But for most of my quilting career, I did everything by hand, because that's the way my grandmother made quilts. And I really was inspired to make my first quilt by my grandmother.
So you said it took you 6 years to do the 13. How long per quilt did you say?
I tried to finish the top, not the quilt. A quilt is a sandwich, and the artwork is on the top, and then it's joined to a back layer, and that's called quilting. So I would try to finish a top in 6 months, and then I had another woman who helped me quilt about half of them. So I didn't do all of the quilting, but I would often be quilting one while I was working on the top of another one. I did a lot of research too.
Did your body just, your neck and shoulders and fingers and hands and muscles?
It all hurts. Yeah.
That's a 6 years.
Yeah.
Quick for all that.
Yeah.
Did you get any kind of like a grant that could help finance this, or how did you?
I got a grant from the, what's the Kentucky, the women's thing, Sally Bingham's thing? Foundation for Women. I had a grant there, and I won an Al Smith from the Arts Council. That's a grant that the Kentucky Arts Council gives out, just for doing work. You don't have to, have a plan or anything. You can just show a body of work, and they decide if you're worthy or not. But I was teaching during a lot of this time too, as artists in residence in schools across Kentucky. So
Where did you get the idea for paper doll quilts? Is that something that other people do?
it was because Nellie wouldn't play with paper dolls.
You said that, so I was wondering if you were the one
Yeah.
that came up with the idea.
Yeah.
So it was your idea.
And I wanted to still play with paper dolls.
Well, I played with paper dolls a lot. So
Well, you should have come over to my house,
I
Stacy.
should have.
Paper
I
dolls.
can tell you all the ladies I used to visit who had collections of paper dolls that I played with.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Good.
And now